The United States is witnessing hundreds of Americans uprising in Minneapolis, spreading to dozens of American cities where there have been hundreds of people demonstrating, well, hundreds of thousands rather, demonstrating and also causing an uprising in that country. Now, more than 4,000 people were arrested over the weekend. Curfews have been declared. National Guard troops summoned. This is subsequent to the death of a black man, George Floyd, killed by an officer of the law. To give us an update this morning on the latest developments, American political analyst Cedric McKay now joins us via Skype. Cedric, good morning and thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning. I'm happy to be with you.
Cedric, just to start with, perhaps you can give us an overview of the current status in light of the protests and solidarity following, the death of Mr. George Floyd.
Yeah, it's a tragic situation, and there are a couple of ways I can describe this current state of our country. On the one hand, I would have to say that we are ablaze with fire across the country, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. From the Canadian border to the north, all the way to the states which border the Republic of Mexico in the south, you see Americans in the street protesting what we have seen. The horrible torture of an American citizen to his death by law enforcement with seeming impunity had there not been outrage by the American public. And at the same time, we're adrift with virus. COVID-19 continues to devastate the country. We lead the world in the number of deaths. And we also have a virus of white racism, which continues to plague this country after 400 years of oppression of Africans and 500 years of oppression of the native population. We have to really seek some redress to these problems, which are at the core and the heart of the American reality.
Not only do you lead the virus with a number of deaths, but African Americans within the U.S. seem to be the most affected by COVID-19 due to, the health system set up in such a way that it disadvantages black people. So you have African Americans or black Americans mostly infected and also making up most of the number of deaths happening in that country around this virus. And at a time like this, putting their lives at risk to go out and to, demonstrate and to be a part of this movement right now, putting themselves at risk because this is a mass gathering of thousands and thousands of people. What are your sentiments around that?
It shows the desperation in the hearts of the American people, doesn't it? People know that they're putting their lives at risk to go and protest against what we have seen, not only in Minneapolis, but in every American city. This could have been replicated in any city in America. And the public knows it, the American people know it, and they are outraged by it. And why are we so slow to punish law enforcement officials who kill Americans? Not just harm them, not just abuse them. We have seen law enforcement officials kill Americans with impunity. And in this situation, with COVID-19 abundant and abounding, American citizens are deciding to go to the streets and protest against their governments and against their leadership to say we can no longer stand this, even at the risk of our health and our lives. We know that our physical lives are in danger. So there's the conundrum. So people have decided to use their voices.
And how has the federal government's response been to the cry of its own citizens?
Without categorizing the American president as a blithering idiot, I have to say the federal government has been behind. We have seen a president use tear gas to disperse a peaceful protest across from the White House so that he can take a photo opportunity to walk across the street and take a picture in a church where he does not worship, holding a Bible which he does not read, and perhaps projecting a faith in which he doesn't have any worship commitment and responsibility. He's clearly focused on his reelection campaign, even to the detriment of the lives of his own citizens. The federal government has not been helpful. The states have been to themselves. The governors even had a phone call with the president on earlier today on Monday, and it turned into an argument. We have seen horrible, horrible leadership from our federal government, and it is an abysmal shame and an embarrassment.
There is a bill, Cedric, that has been introduced in the U.S. Congress addressing police reform. What are the implications of this?
It's a little complicated, and I don't want to get too deep in the weeds for the Namibian viewer, but essentially, a police officer has impunity. Anything that they do, there's no citizen that can seek a redress of grievance against these police officers, because the Supreme Court has decided to interpret the law in such a way back in 1982, which has offered really impunity to them. And since that time, we have seen what one might call a greater explosion in police violence and the militarization of police and the way that police have abused their rights. For example, there's a case of a police arriving at a man's home, the wrong home. They did not have a warrant. They did not knock. They banged the door down, shot inside, killed the guy. His family could not receive any nothing at all. They just had to just bury the guy, and that's the end of it. It's not the way we conduct our democracy. So we need to change these laws. But some parts of our country have really held on to this because and I would say it's the white racists, because they see it as a chance to hold on to power by using a militarization force. It is a dying option for them. And we see that more and more Americans are saying we will have to change laws. We have to change policing to move from being warriors to being protectors. And so there's a shift in the political attitude and awareness going on in the U.S. right now. So we can expect that this bill will have some currency. There is still a majority of Republicans in the Senate. This bill might not make it all the way through with the Republican president, but we can expect to see some movement, and it perhaps will be an election issue as we move toward November.
Just quickly, Cedric, for maybe our viewers that are not aware of the situation in America, not what's happening just currently, but how it has been for many, many, many years. How indicative would you say are these actions to the current state of social justice or injustice in America today?
It's a perfect mirror. We live in two societies at the very best. My wife has a doctorate degree. Myself, I have a master's degree and a graduate certificate. But we are still subject to this same harassment, the same mistreatment, the same disrespect by our own civil authorities. So it's this protest that we're seeing, it's not somehow a part of the American fringe. This is a mainline American political problem. And it must be addressed. And the people that you see in the street, which I shall say are in two categories. You have protesters, and then you have some folks who are looters. So the protesters have a righteous cause. Then there are some just criminal elements that are finding ways to steal things that are looters. We don't confuse them. The protesters are holding up our righteous cause, and it's an important one. And it's reflective of the division of our American society.
You mentioned earlier for change to be seen in this country, there needs to be a political shift. And we know that come November, elections is happening. And, Americans were entrusted with making the right choice previously. And Donald Trump ended up being the president of the country. How much of a chance do you think there is of this happening again come November?
We were all surprised. Very few people who read the polls thought that this president would have been elected. And there are some who still contend that there's been some funny business, but it is behind us at this point. I cannot believe at this point, with what we see, we will see this president return to power. He does not have a majority. The voters don't believe in him. He has a small minority, largely rooted in white racism and white nationalists, but the largest share of the population realize that our economy is headed in the wrong direction. His management of COVID-19 has been horrible. Our international reputation has been ruined. There is nothing good that has come from this White House that we want to continue for 4 more years. I cannot see the Americans returning him back to power.
Well, I hope so indeed, Cedric. You mentioned earlier that there's obviously a clear distinction between the protesters and then the looters who are just taking advantage of the situation. But I'm thinking about what positive lessons can come from actions, from these mass unity actions of citizens when we do have the looting happening, which obviously is a negative. We do have the burning buildings happening. What positivity can come from this?
So when we look at the protesters, we see something very interesting. It's a cross-section of the American reality. We see young people, we see older people, a great many young people, I should say, of every racial group, of every social, economic status. We see a cross-section of America cooperating and working together. Somehow, though, there's been an infiltration of other groups. Some have suggested anarchists who have fomented some violence. And here's the challenge. We're 12 weeks into quarantine. Many people have not received any support or benefit from the government. And they see this grocery store with the windows busted open and there's food inside they cannot afford and they are hungry. They will go steal. It has nothing to do with the protest. It has a lot to do with the economic deprivation of a large portion of our society. And we should separate the two.
We know that the officer that has been charged with the killing of George Floyd was charged with third-degree murder. Can you give us an update on the status of that right now?
I don't think it has been raised. Many people are very unhappy with this charge. They think it's too low.
Yeah.
Some people have suggested a second degree. Even a few have suggested first degree because they had some awareness of each other. They had, having allegedly or reportedly worked in the same place for many, many years.
Right.
This seems to be perhaps a crime of passion or of some sort of personal anger. But right now we see a third-degree murder charge. The other officers have not yet been charged, to my understanding. We expect that they shall be. And, it's very frustrating because some of the protesters have said, had you simply arrested these murderers, the nation would not have had to go to protest.
Correct.
Yeah. So it's we're hoping to expect some sort of healthy judicial justice from this case. We're going to trust that process. But I think we should all be very clear that if there is a disappointing result, the people will go back to the street.
Yeah. Cedric, any closing remarks from you this morning?
I want to say that the situation in our country is bleak. So we would enjoy the good thoughts and prayers of the people of Namibia. And for those of you who have family members here in this country, please check on them. COVID-19 is a serious problem. These riots or rather I should say protests, and then some of the rioters have posed some serious challenges for a lot of us. So hold us in your good thoughts. We are at a very critical place, but we're hoping that we'll come out on the other side both of this virus of COVID-19 and this virus of white racism. And we hope that we shall meet again.
Indeed, we will, Cedric, and we stand with you. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you so much, and good morning, Namibia.
That was Cedric McKay, political analyst in the United States, talking to us via Skype about the situation on the ground concerning the demonstrations happening not only in Minnesota but all over America in different cities following the death of a civilian, that is George Floyd, who was killed by a white police officer.